There is a story of a man who wandered into the desert not to escape the world, but to let the world escape him. The wind carved his edges, the sun stripped him bare, and the silence, oh, the silence, whispered questions he had spent a lifetime running from. Have you ever wondered what happens to a man when the noise fades? When the voices of others dissolve into the hush of his own breath, and he is left with nothing but the echo of his thoughts? Is it emptiness that greets him, or an abyss so vast it terrifies him into revelation? What does silence do to a man? Does it hollow him out, or does it fill him with something older than language, something truer than the stories he's been told about who he's supposed to be? We live in a world that worships sound, the chatter of connection, the hum of validation, the relentless drumbeat of distraction. We are taught that silence is a void to be feared, a symptom of absence, a failure to be heard. But what if silence is not the absence of something, but the presence of everything? Consider the monk in his cave, the hermit in his hut, the sailor adrift on a moonlit sea. They do not speak, yet they understand something the rest of us have forgotten. That silence is not a wall, it is a mirror, and what a man sees in that mirror is not always what he expects. At first, he may see only what's missing: the laughter of friends, the warmth of a lover, the reassuring noise of belonging. But if he stares long enough, something shifts, the reflection deepens, and he realizes the silence isn't showing him what he lacks. It's showing him what he is. What happens when a man stops running from that reflection? When he stops filling the quiet with music, with screens, with the weight of another body beside him just to prove he exists. The Stoics called this the inner citadel, the unshakable core that can only be found when all else is stripped away. But to reach it, a man must walk through fire, the fire of his own judgments, his own fears, the parts of himself he's buried under a lifetime of noise. So let me ask you this: what would you hear if you truly listened to your own silence? Not the borrowed scripts of who you should be, not the echoes of others' expectations, but the voice beneath all voices, the one that speaks only when everything else has gone still. There's a reason we fear quiet. It's not because there's nothing there, but because there's everything. Every unlived dream, every unspoken truth, every version of yourself you've abandoned to keep the peace. Silence doesn't erase these things, it amplifies them. Imagine a man who finally stops drowning them out, who sits in the stillness long enough to hear the whispers of his own soul. At first, it's unbearable. The weight of his own unmet potential, the grief for the life he could have lived if he hadn't been so busy performing for the world. But then, if he doesn't run, something extraordinary happens. The silence stops being an enemy and becomes an ally. It's no longer a void, but a forge. And in that forge, he is remade. The world will tell him he's wrong. That silence is loneliness, that solitude is suffering. But the ancients knew better. The desert fathers, the Zen masters, the philosophers who walked alone under the stars. They understood that silence is the birthplace of wisdom. Because when no one else is speaking, you can finally hear yourself think. And what is that, if not the most intimate form of rebellion? To refuse the world's noise and listen instead to your own. So I ask you again, what does silence do to a man? It doesn't weaken him. It distills him. Like a blade tempered in fire, like wine aged in darkness, he becomes something stronger, sharper, more potent, but only if he endures the alchemy. Only if he doesn't flinch when the silence shows him who he really is. And here's the secret the world doesn't want you to know. Silence isn't the absence of sound. It's the presence of you, unfiltered, unedited, no longer defined by the roles you play, the masks you wear, the people you try to please, just the raw, unvarnished truth of your existence. And what could be more terrifying or more liberating? So tell me, have you ever dared to meet yourself in the quiet? Not the version of you that the world applauds, not the persona you've polished for consumption, but the one that only emerges when there's no one left to perform for. The one that silence reveals. If this resonates with you, if you feel the pull of that uncharted terrain within, then you understand why we must keep going. There's more to uncover, more to confront. And if you're willing to walk deeper into the quiet, stay with me. Like and subscribe, because this is only the beginning. Because the truth is, silence doesn't just do something to a man, it undoes him. And in that undoing, he finds the one thing he's been searching for all along, himself. There is a moment, a razor's edge between resistance and surrender, when a man stops fighting the silence and lets it swallow him whole. It feels like dying, like the death of every lie he's ever told himself to keep the world at bay. But here's the paradox. It's only in that dissolution that he becomes solid. Only when he stops running from the emptiness does he realize it was never empty at all. Think of the deepest ocean trench, a place so dark, so pressurized, no ordinary thing could survive its weight. And yet, life thrives there. Creatures with no need for light, shaped by the crushing depth into forms both alien and exquisite. That is what silence does to a man. It presses down until all that's left is what's real, until the armor of persona cracks and the raw, pulsing core of him is laid bare. The world calls this loneliness. The poets call it melancholy, but the mystics, they call it initiation, because what emerges from that depth is not the same man who descended. He walks lighter, sees clearer, no longer starved for external validation, because he has tasted something far more nourishing, his own unshakable presence. So I ask you, what would you find if you let the silence press upon you that way? Not the curated self you post online, not the performative charm you wield at parties, but the thing beneath all that, the unnameable you that exists when no one is watching, when no one is listening, when there is nothing left to prove. There's a story about a sculptor who was asked how he carved an elephant from stone. He said, "I simply chipped away everything that wasn't the elephant." Silence does the same to a man. It strips away everything that isn't him. The opinions, the expectations, the borrowed identities all fall like rubble. What remains is both terrifying and magnificent, his essence. But here's the catch. Most men never let it happen. At the first pang of discomfort, they reach for their phones, their vices, their desperate need to be seen, heard, acknowledged. They mistake the ache of transformation for the sting of neglect. They don't realize the silence wasn't punishing them. It was polishing them. So let me ask you this. What have you been using to drown out your own quiet? The endless scroll, the hollow chatter, the relationships that feel more like distractions than devotions? And what might happen if you stopped? If you let the void have its way with you? The ancients weren't afraid of silence. They sought it like miners seeking gold. The desert fathers fled to caves not to escape the world, but to meet it, to meet themselves in the rawest form. Because they knew a truth we've forgotten. You cannot hear the gods if you're always speaking. You cannot find yourself if you're always hiding in the noise. And so the question isn't, what does silence do to a man? But what will you allow it to do to you? Will you let it break you open? Will you let it remake you? Or will you spend your life flinching from the very thing that could set you free? This isn't philosophy. This is alchemy. The transformation of leaden fear into golden awareness, and it starts, always, with the courage to be still, to let the silence in, to let it do its work. So tell me, are you ready to listen? Really listen, not to me, not to the world, but to the voice that only speaks when everything else goes quiet? If you are, then stay with me. This is where it gets interesting. Like and subscribe, because the journey is just beginning. And the silent? It has so much left to say. Silence isn't an absence, it's an unveiling, a reckoning. The moment a man stops begging the world for answers and finally hears the one question that matters, who are you when no one is listening? Not the man you pretend to be. Not the man you wish you were, just you, raw, unfiltered, real. So tell me, when the noise fades and the silence comes, who will you find?